Hello again. We are going to move on to the next chapter in our discussion of Algebra 1, and we are going to talk about how to graph equations if they're given to us in slope-intercept form. So let's get started. Here's what slope-intercept form is. It's any line that's written in the form y equals mx plus b. So your y is going to be a y, your x is going to be an x, but the other two letters are going to be replaced with numbers. So whatever number replaces m, that's going to be the slope of your line, and whatever number replaces b, that's going to be the y-intercept of your line. That's going to be where the line crosses the y-axis. Okay, so for example, if I have the line y equals 3x plus 5, that's going to have a slope of 3, and it's going to have a y-intercept of 0, 5. Remember, every y-intercept has an x-coordinate of 0. That's automatic. Okay, so that's what that line actually looks like. And it has a slope of 3. We've talked about how to find slope. And the y-intercept is 0, 5. It crosses the y-axis at 5. So here's some more examples. If I wanted to find the slope and the y-intercept of y equals negative 7x plus 19, the slope is the number that's in front of the x. That's the negative 7, and the y-intercept is the number that's off by itself with no letters attached to it, so that is the 19. If I had y equals 1.3x minus 4.5, then that means the slope would be 1.3 and the y-intercept would be 4.5. Now, if y equals 4x, you'll notice that there's no number at the end being added or subtracted. All that means is that the slope is 4, but the y-intercept is 0. So I really don't need to write plus 0. It's not wrong if I do, but if there's nothing after that x term, then you can say that the y-intercept is 0. Okay, if I have the equation y equals 11, now I have no x term. Well, that means that x has been multiplied by 0. So that means the slope is 0 and the y-intercept is 11. We've actually talked about that kind of line, and it's a horizontal line, and it's going to cross through 11 on the y-axis. Now, if I have an equation like x equals 12, we've talked about that as well. That's a vertical line. So the slope is going to be undefined, and since it's a vertical line, it's going to be parallel to the y-axis, so it's not going to cross the y-axis at all. It's going to have no y-intercept. Okay, so here's how I graph lines in slope-intercept form once they're in that form. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at that number that's at the end that was being added or subtracted, and I'm going to find that number on the y-axis since it is the y-intercept. Then I'm going to look at the slope. Now, the slope is usually made up of a fraction. If it's not a fraction, if it's a whole number instead, you can put that whole number over 1, and then it looks like a fraction. So the numerator of that fraction is going to be the rise, how much I go up or down, and the denominator is going to be the run, how far I go left or right to get from any point to the next point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up by the rise and right by the run, and if they're negative, I will go down or left, depending on which one's negative. And then I'm going to draw another point after I travel the rise and travel the run. Now I have 2 points. That's all I need in order to know where the line is going to be. So I join those points and I make a line. So those are the steps I'm going to follow. Here's an example of what I would do if I were to graph y equals 5/4 x minus 3. I'm going to look at that minus 3 that's at the end, and that's my y-intercept. So I find negative 3 on the y-axis and I put a dot there. Then I look at the slope. The slope is 5/4, which means the rise is 5 and the run is 4. So from that y-intercept, I'm going to rise 5, go up 5, and I'm going to run 4, go to the right 4, and I'm going to make a point. So now I have 2 points, the y-intercept, and I have that other green point. So I know exactly where my line is, and I just go ahead and draw it. Okay, here's another example. If I have y equals negative 2x plus 7, the y-intercept is going to be 7, so I find that on the y-axis and I put a dot. The slope is negative 2, and remember when I talked about integers, I can put that over 1. So negative 2 is the same thing as negative 2 over 1. So now I have a rise and I have a run. So the rise is negative 2, which means I actually go down 2 spaces, and the run is 1, so I go to the right 1 space. So if I do that, I make another point. Now I have 2 points, and I can draw the line. Okay, easy enough. Now, if I am starting in standard form, we've talked about standard form when we began an earlier chapter, and I had the hands covering up the terms. Well, it's kind of the same thing here. I'm going to try and graph this by covering up parts of the equation and figuring out where the intercepts are. So I'm going to find those intercepts. I'm going to cover up the y's to find my x-intercept. So if I set y equal to 0 and I cover up those y's, I get 5x equals 15. Okay, if I divide both sides by 5, I get x equals 3. Now if I cover up the x's, I have an equation that says 3y equals 15. And if I divide that by 3 on both sides, I get y equals 5. So again, I have 2 points, and that's all I need in order to know where the line is. Okay, now if I wanted to know the slope of that line and the y-intercept of that line, I've got to do a little bit of work. So I know that the y-intercept is 5 because I have just found that, and you can see that it crosses the y-axis at 5. But I still don't know the slope. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the 2 dots that I've created and figure out what the slope is between those 2 points. Figure out how far I would have to rise to get from one point to the next, and figure out how far I would have to run to get from one point to the next. Well, it looks like to get from the x-intercept to the y-intercept, I would have to go up 5 or rise 5, and I would have to run -3 or go left 3 spaces. So my slope is going to be 5 over -3 or -5 over 3. As long as one of the numbers is negative, but not both of them, then the slope is correct. Okay, we already know the y-intercept is 5, so the equation is y equals -5/3 x plus 5. Okay, the slope times x plus the y-intercept. Okay, here's another one. I'm going to start in standard form again. It's going to be 2x minus 7y equals 14. So we're going to try and find the slope and the y-intercept. Well, let's find the intercepts first. Cover up the y's by setting y equal to 0, and I get 2x equals 14. If I divide both sides by 2, I get x equals 7. That's my x-intercept, so I put a dot there. Okay. If I want to find the y-intercept, I set x equal to 0, and I cover up those x's, and I get -7y equals 14. Divide both sides by -7, and I will get -2. So my y-intercept is going to be -2. Okay, so I join those 2 dots. I know exactly where the line is. I know that my y-intercept is -2, but because I just figured it out, but I don't know what the slope is. So let's figure out, to get from one of those points to the other point, how far would I have to rise and how far would I have to run? Okay. So to get from the red dot to the green dot, I would have to rise 2 and I would have to run 7. So the slope is going to be 2 over 7. Okay, I already know that the y-intercept is -2, so I know that the equation can be written as y equals 2/7 x minus 2. Okay, so that's how you find the slope and the y-intercept of a line in hopes of writing it in slope-intercept form. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I will see you tomorrow.